Welcome back, beautiful souls, to Her Kindle Stories. Here we share real stories that prove it's never too late to reclaim your life, your voice, and your dignity. If anyone has ever made you feel like you're too old to start over, I want you to remember this. It is never too late. Your story isn't finished, and you still have chapters waiting to be written. Today's story is one that still takes my breath away when I think about it. It isn't about wealth or success. It's about a 72-year-old grandmother named Brenda Shepherd, who was told by her own son to hand over her savings for her grandkids' private school tuition, or pack her bags and leave. What followed wasn't anger or shouting. Brenda quietly zipped her suitcase, walked out the door, and chose peace over guilt. And with the help of her lawyer, she reminded her family and herself that boundaries aren't betrayal, they're survival. Now let's step into Brenda's world, where savings, legacy, and quiet strength came together in ways her son and daughter-in-law never saw coming. My name is Brenda Shepherd. I'm 72 years old, and I never thought I'd live to hear the words my own son spoke to me that afternoon. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the back of a chair, like it was the only thing holding him upright. His voice was steady, but it cut sharper than anything I've ever heard. "Mom," he said, "if you're not going to help us pay the kids' tuition with your savings, then you'll need to figure out another living arrangement." That was it. No warm-up, no gentle lead-in, just a flat demand. And right there next to him stood Janice, my daughter-in-law, with her arms folded across her chest like she'd been rehearsing this moment for days. She didn't add a word, but her posture said enough. She agreed with him. She was waiting for me to break. I didn't. The air in that kitchen went so quiet you could have heard the refrigerator hum. I looked at Jeffrey, the boy I raised, the boy I worked double shifts to put through school, the boy who once held my hand crossing Main Street on the way to the library. I looked at him and realized he wasn't a boy anymore, but he sure wasn't the kind of man I thought he'd be either. I didn't raise a quitter, and I didn't raise someone who'd corner his own mother like a bill collector. But there he was, staring at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence stretch between us. Sometimes silence says more than words. Janice shifted her weight, rolled her eyes, and let out a sigh loud enough to make sure I heard it. Jeffrey cleared his throat like he was waiting for me to say something, anything that would give him what he wanted. But I didn't. I turned, walked down the hallway, and headed straight for the bedroom they had given me when I moved in. That little room with the twin bed and the dresser from Goodwill. It wasn't much, but it had been mine for the last 3 years. I opened the closet, bent down, and pulled out my old navy blue suitcase. The same one I used when I moved in after my husband, John, passed away. The same one I'd thought I'd never use again except for short trips or maybe a cruise with the church ladies. I set it on the bed, and instead of crying, instead of begging, I just stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. And here's the truth. What I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even fear. It was relief. I finally had my answer. They thought I'd cry. They thought I'd argue. They thought I'd given like I always had when they pushed me. But instead, I zipped that suitcase and felt lighter than I had in years. Now, let me back up just a little because you need to understand how I got here. When John died, the house felt like a cave. 48 years of marriage gone in a matter of weeks. The walls echoed, and no matter how many lights I turned on, it was dark. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Nights were the worst. Jeffrey called one evening, his voice low and careful, and said, "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a while? The kids would love having you around, and it'll be good for you to have company." I agreed. I told myself it was temporary, just until I found my footing again. At first, it wasn't bad. I had a roof over my head. I helped with the grandkids here and there. I cooked dinner sometimes. I even helped pay for groceries without thinking too much of it. It felt good to be needed. But slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, temporary became permanent. My name wasn't on the mortgage, but my money was in their bills. My hands were in their laundry. My time was in their children. When Jeffrey and Janice bought this house, I helped cover the closing costs with money John and I had saved. I told myself it was just a loan, but I never saw that money again. Then came the small things, new shoes for the kids, birthday parties, sports sign-ups. I pulled out my checkbook more often than not. And every time I told myself, what's a few dollars when it's for family? The problem is a few dollars here and a few dollars there turned into thousands. And still, it wasn't enough. Now, they wanted my savings, my future, the little bit of security John and I built over decades of hard work. They wanted me to hand it over so the kids could go to a private academy across town instead of the perfectly fine public school right down the street. It wasn't about the children's education. Don't get me wrong. I love those kids more than life. But this wasn't about them. This was about status, about Janice not wanting to sit at PTA meetings with the other moms and admit her kids weren't enrolled in the best school in Franklin. So here I was, 72 years old, standing over a suitcase, realizing that my own son had put me in the same category as a bank account. I packed slowly, a couple of dresses, my Bible, the quilt John's mother had stitched for us on our wedding day, a photograph of him on the fishing pier the summer before he passed. I didn't bother taking the things I'd bought for their house, the toaster, the bedding, the dishes. Those weren't mine anymore. They'd been swallowed up into the life Jeffrey and Janice built on the back of my contributions. As I folded my clothes, I thought back to something John once told me. We were sitting on the porch swing after paying off the last of our mortgage. He squeezed my hand and said, "Brenda, whatever happens, we've done it the right way. We've stood on our own 2 feet. Nobody can take that from us." Except now his own son was trying to. I zipped up the suitcase, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. I was done. From the hallway, I could hear the muffled sound of the television. The kids' laughter floated through the floorboards. And somewhere in the kitchen, Janice's voice carried, sharp and clipped, as she talked on the phone. But none of that mattered anymore, because I knew the truth. The moment they gave me that ultimatum, the moment Jeffrey spoke those words, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to beg for space in a house I helped pay for. I wasn't going to drain my savings to keep peace in a family that didn't respect me. They told me I had to choose. So I did. I chose myself. And when I wheeled that suitcase to the front door, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Not a burden, not a wallet, not an extra set of hands. I saw a woman who had given everything she could and finally decided she had given enough. That's how it started, with one sentence from my son and one decision from me. When I look back now, I can see how it all started. But at the time, it felt harmless. After John passed, the house in Murfreesboro became too big and too empty. Every chair, every room, every cup in the cabinet had his fingerprints on it. Nights stretched longer than I could bear. I'd sit at the kitchen table with the TV on for noise and still feel like I was living in a hollow shell. That's when Jeffrey called. He said, "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a bit? The kids will love having you, and it'll give you a break from that old house." It sounded like an answer to a prayer. His home in Franklin was newer, full of life, and only an hour away. I packed a few bags, left the rest in storage, and told myself it would just be for a little while, 6 months maybe, just until I figured out what came next. At first, it felt like family again. The grandkids were little then, always running to me, with sticky fingers and wide eyes. I'd fix them sandwiches, read bedtime stories, or sit on the porch while they played in the yard. I pitched in with groceries when I went to the store, and I cooked Sunday dinners so Janice wouldn't have to. It gave me purpose, and it gave them some breathing room. Nobody asked me to cover much. Not in the beginning. Jeffrey even said, "Don't worry about bills, Mom. We've got it handled." But life has a way of blurring the lines. One afternoon, maybe 3 months in, Jeffrey came into my room with a bill in his hand. He said, "Mom, the power bill's higher than usual this month. Could you spot it just this once? We'll pay you back." It was no trouble. I wrote a check, happy to help. That's what family does, right? But just this once turned into the next month, and the one after that. Before long, the electric bill had quietly become mine. Then came the car insurance. Jeffrey had switched jobs, and his paycheck was running behind. He asked if I could cover the premium so they wouldn't lose coverage. He said it would only be temporary. I paid it, of course, but temporary stretched into years. The pattern was always the same. Something came up. They'd look worried. I'd reach for my purse. No one said thank you. No one ever said, "We'll take care of it now." It just became expected. I don't think they meant for it to start that way. Maybe they convinced themselves I didn't mind, that I had more than I needed. But every time I said yes, I lost a little piece of the boundary I should have protected. It wasn't just money either. It was time. If Janice had an early meeting, she'd call down the hall, "Brenda, can you get the kids ready for school?" If Jeffrey worked late, he'd text, "Mom, could you throw something together for dinner?" I didn't mind cooking or babysitting now and then, but little by little, it became my whole role in that house. I'd go to the grocery store and pick up milk, eggs, and bread. But I'd also buy the brand of cereal the kids liked, the snacks Janice kept in her desk at work, and the sparkling water Jeffrey drank. I paid out of my pocket, and when I brought it home, nobody asked how much it cost. They just unpacked the bags like it was theirs. I never saw my picture on the wall. They had photos of birthdays, vacations, even a big family portrait over the fireplace, but I wasn't in any of them. I'd taken the pictures, cooked the meals, paid for the cakes, and yet my face wasn't there. I was present but invisible. One spring afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting mail when Janice walked in. She glanced at a property tax bill lying on the counter. She picked it up, tapped the envelope with her finger, and said almost casually, "You know, Brenda, since you live here too, maybe it makes sense for you to cover half of this. It's only fair." She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. I remember sitting there stunned, staring at her as she set the bill down in front of me. She didn't wait for an answer, didn't ask if I was able. She just left it there, as if I'd naturally handle it. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't even family in their eyes. I had become a financial cushion, someone to lean on, to fall back on, to quietly shoulder whatever was too heavy for them. And it wasn't just the money. It was the lack of acknowledgement, no appreciation, no respect. If I paid, it was expected. If I didn't, it was a problem. I told myself for a long time that I was helping because I wanted to, because that's what mothers do. But deep down, I started to see the truth. They didn't see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as a resource, and resources run out. I began to feel it every time I opened my checkbook, every time I swiped my card at the store, every time Janice asked for something, just this once. I didn't complain. I didn't raise my voice. But I kept a tally in my mind, a tally of all the little ways my life had been absorbed into theirs without a trace of gratitude. A house that was supposed to be a refuge had turned into a place where I was more useful than loved. That's why, when Jeffrey finally said the words about my savings and the tuition, I wasn't surprised deep down. I'd seen it building. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. Looking back, the signs were all there. When they took my contributions without thanks, when they left me out of the family photos, when Janice handed me a property tax bill like it was my duty, piece by piece, they showed me exactly what I meant to them. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not even Brenda, just a financial cushion. And once I understood that, everything else started to make sense. When I heard Jeffrey talk about my savings like it was his for the taking, all I could think about was how hard John and I worked to build that nest egg. We didn't come from money. John started out as an apprentice for a small plumbing company right after high school. He'd come home at night with hands so rough they'd scratch my arm when he brushed against me in bed. He never complained. He said honest work might be dirty, but it kept food on the table. By the time we were married, he had saved enough to buy a used truck and a box of tools. That truck was the start of Shepherd Plumbing. Just him at first, running service calls, fixing leaky faucets, installing water heaters. I was his secretary, bookkeeper, and sometimes delivery driver. I'd answer the phone while stirring dinner, scribble down addresses, and send him out with a thermos of coffee. We never had much extra. Vacations meant driving to the Smoky Mountains and renting a cabin for a few days. The kids grew up in hand-me-downs and rode second-hand bikes. But we stayed out of debt. That was John's rule. If we can't pay cash, we don't buy it. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady built security. Every Friday, after paying the bills, I'd put a little into savings. Some weeks, it was $50. Some weeks only 10. But I never missed a week. Over the years, that habit grew into something solid. By the time John retired, we had enough tucked away to cover our needs. Not enough to live rich, but enough to live safe. We didn't waste a dime. Our cars were always used, our furniture simple, our clothes practical. The one thing we splurged on was health insurance. John said, "We'll never regret having good coverage." He was right. When he got sick, that insurance kept us from drowning in hospital bills. The day he passed, I sat at the kitchen table with a folder full of papers. The savings account balance was circled in red ink. That number was supposed to be my protection, my lifeline, the proof that all those years of packing lunches, fixing pipes, and pinching pennies meant something. And now my own son wanted me to drain it, not for medicine, not for a roof repair, but for private school tuition. I can still hear John's voice plain as day. He used to say, "Brenda, we're not rich, but we'll always stand on our own 2 feet. We take care of ourselves." That was the lesson we lived by. Work hard, live within your means, save what you can, and don't expect handouts. We raised our kids with those same words. Jeffrey grew up watching his father fix sinks until midnight, then get up before dawn for another call. He saw me balancing ledgers at the kitchen table while keeping the lights on and the pantry full. So how did that boy become a man who looks his mother in the eye and says, "Use your savings for my kid's school or leave"? It felt like betrayal, not just of me, but of everything his father stood for. Private school wasn't something John and I ever considered. We sent Jeffrey and his sister to public schools, and they turned out just fine. Public schools taught them to read, write, and count. They had dedicated teachers who cared about them. We didn't need uniforms or fancy gyms to raise good kids. I know times have changed. I know parents want to give their children every advantage, but there's a difference between wanting the best and demanding someone else pay for it. That savings is my security. It's what keeps me from lying awake at night, wondering if I can cover a medical bill. It's what gives me the freedom to live the rest of my life without being a burden. It's not extra money lying around. It's not disposable. It's survival. Jeffrey sees a number in a bank account. I see 50 years of sacrifice. I see John's tired hands. I see the Saturday mornings we skipped eating out so we could put that money away. I see the vacations we didn't take and the new cars we didn't buy. Every dollar in that account carries a memory. I thought about the nights John and I sat at the kitchen table after the kids went to bed. He'd sip his coffee while I added up the receipts. He'd pat my hand and say, "You're the reason we're going to be okay, Brenda. You always make sure we're steady." He trusted me with our future. He knew I'd protect it, and now I was being asked to hand it over like it was monopoly money. What hurt most wasn't even the demand. It was the entitlement. The way Jeffrey said it so matter of fact, like of course I'd say yes. Like of course I'd give up the one thing standing between me and dependency. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. He didn't ask if I needed that money for myself. He just drew a line, pay or leave. I sat on the edge of that bed with my suitcase and thought about how far we drifted from the values John lived by. My son, raised by two people who worked themselves to the bone to stay independent, now telling me to give up my independence for his convenience. It broke something inside me, but it also woke me up. I realized in that moment that if I gave in, it wouldn't stop with tuition. Next year, it would be sports fees, then a car for the kids, then college. Once you open that door, it never closes. And what about me? What about the woman who spent her whole life making sure everyone else had what they needed? Didn't I deserve to grow old with dignity? Didn't I deserve to use my savings for my own care, for my own peace of mind? I thought of John again. I could almost hear him say, "Brenda, don't you dare let anyone take what we built. That money is your safety. It's the reward for all those years we stood on our own feet." That's why, when Jeffrey made his demand, I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I chose my suitcase, because deep down, I knew John would have told me to do the same. And as I zipped it up, I promised myself one thing. I would never let anyone guilt me into giving away my future. Not even my own son. The strangest part was how calm I felt. You would think after being told by your own child to hand over your savings or move out, I would have been shaking, crying, maybe even shouting. But instead, there was this quiet, steady feeling that settled over me as I reached for the top dresser drawer. I pulled out the photo album first, the one with the leather cover and worn edges from being opened so many times. Inside were the pictures that told my life: wedding days, smiles, Sunday picnics, Christmas mornings with sleepy-eyed children. I slid it carefully into the suitcase. That album mattered more than any of the furniture scattered through that house. Next went my Bible. The cover is cracked, pages dog-eared, and verses underlined with notes in the margins. I could hear John's voice in my head saying, "Keep that close, Brenda. It'll guide you when I'm not here." He was right. That Bible had been my anchor more times than I could count. Then I picked up John's old wristwatch. It doesn't even run anymore, but I can still see him tapping it when he thought I was taking too long to get ready for church. I wrapped it in a scarf and tucked it in beside the photo album. I added 2 dresses, my Sunday shoes, and a sweater I've had for years. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by for now. Everything else I left behind. The dishes I had bought when I first moved in stayed in their cabinets. The quilt I picked up for the guest room folded neatly on the bed. Even the toaster and coffee maker I'd purchased when theirs broke, I left them all. I didn't want a single thing that tied me to that house anymore. It wasn't that I didn't care about those things. I did, but they weren't really mine anymore. They'd been swallowed into Jeffrey and Janice's household. Taking them with me would have felt like fighting for scraps. And I was done fighting for scraps. As I folded the last blouse, I heard footsteps in the hallway. For a second, I thought maybe Jeffrey had come to check on me, to say something, anything that showed he realized what he had just done. But the steps faded. He never came. He stayed in the kitchen, scrolling on his phone, pretending nothing was happening. It was Janice who lingered. She kept drifting in and out, wiping down counters that were already clean, opening the fridge like she was checking what we had, but really just watching me. She never said a word, but her eyes told me she expected me to backtrack. Maybe she thought I'd close the suitcase, apologize for overreacting, and hand over what they wanted. She underestimated me. I zipped the suitcase slowly. That sound echoed in the little bedroom, louder than anything either of them had said. It was the sound of finality. When I lifted the suitcase, it felt heavy in my hand, but light in my heart. I stood in the doorway of that room and looked around one last time. For 3 years I'd called it my room, but the truth was it had never really been mine. It was just a space where I had been useful. I carried the suitcase down the hallway, past the pictures on the wall. Pictures of birthday parties, vacations, and milestones, all without me in them. My face was missing, but my money had been in every single one. When I passed the living room, the memory hit me hard. I had spent countless afternoons in that very spot, rocking their babies to sleep while they worked or ran errands. I'd fed bottles, changed diapers, and whispered lullabies in that room for free. For love. And now, walking past it with my suitcase in hand, I realized something painful. In their eyes, I wasn't a mother or a grandmother anymore. I was just a savings account with legs. That thought stung, but it also cleared the fog. It made every step toward the front door easier. Janice watched me as I slipped on my coat. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't ask where I was going. She just leaned against the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Maybe she thought silence would guilt me. Maybe she thought I'd hesitate. But I didn't. I wheeled the suitcase across the hardwood floor, each roll of the wheels sounding like a drumbeat announcing my choice. When I reached the door, I paused just long enough to glance back. Jeffrey still hadn't looked up from his phone. Not once. That was the final confirmation I needed. I turned the knob, stepped outside, and pulled the door shut behind me. The evening air was cool on my face. For the first time in years, I breathed deep without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. Standing there on the porch with my suitcase at my side, I thought of John again. I imagined him nodding, proud that I hadn't let myself be pushed into a corner. I didn't know where I'd sleep that night, or what the next week would look like. But I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer going to trade my dignity for a place to stay. I lifted the suitcase down the steps, one slow step at a time. And with each step, the burden of the last 3 years fell away. That house was no longer my home. Maybe it never had been. I didn't drive far that night. I just needed somewhere to lay my head that wasn't under Jeffrey's roof. A few miles down the highway, I spotted a little roadside inn with a neon sign buzzing faintly against the evening sky. The place wasn't fancy. 2 rows of rooms, gravel parking lot, soda machine outside, but it had a vacancy sign glowing red. I parked, wheeled my suitcase inside, and asked for a room. The young man at the desk slid a metal key across the counter. Not one of those flimsy plastic cards, but an actual brass key attached to a heavy tag that read Room 7. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it for a long moment. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. 2 double beds, floral curtains, a nightstand with a lamp that wobbled if you touched it. Simple, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that belonged to me and no one else. I set the suitcase down and looked at the key in my hand. It was small, ordinary, but it felt like independence. That key meant no one could barge in, no one could tell me what to do with my life, and no one could threaten me with ultimatums. I made myself a cup of weak coffee from the little machine on the dresser. It wasn't good, but it was hot, and it was mine. I sat on the bed, sipping slowly, thinking about the years I'd spent taking lukewarm coffee breaks in a kitchen where someone always needed something. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in a long while. The next morning, I walked across the street to a small diner with a neon sign that said, "Breakfast served all day." I slid into a booth by the window and ordered scrambled eggs, bacon, and a fresh pot of coffee. The waitress called me Han and asked if I wanted extra butter on my toast. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody called out for help with homework or asked me to add almond milk to the grocery list. I drank that coffee while it was still hot, and I nearly cried, not from sadness, but from relief. It struck me just how much I had forgotten what it felt like to eat a meal without being rushed, without someone tugging on my sleeve, without hearing Janice's voice from the other room asking me to handle something. That breakfast wasn't just food. It was freedom. After eating, I went back to the motel and sat at the small table in the corner. I pulled out a notepad from my suitcase and made a list, not for chores, not for groceries, but for myself. At the top I wrote, things I need to take back. The first item was simple, my money. I picked up the phone and called my bank. I explained that I needed to stop every automatic payment tied to Jeffrey's address, utilities, internet, anything. For years, I had quietly covered those bills thinking it was temporary help. But temporary had turned permanent without my permission. Cancel them all, I told the clerk. Then I called the credit card company. A while back, I had added Janice as an authorized user because she forgot her wallet too often. I told the agent to remove her immediately. After that, I checked every account I had. I wrote down balances, passwords, and due dates. I wanted everything back under my control, no surprises, no hidden drains. Each phone call felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. I sat back in the chair, the notepad in front of me, and whispered out loud. I wasn't just walking away from their house. I was walking back into my own life. The truth is, I had been financing their comfort without even realizing it. My savings wasn't just money, it was years of sacrifice. And here I was, finally saying no. Later that afternoon, I took another walk to the diner. I didn't need more coffee, but I wanted the feeling of being there again. The waitress recognized me and asked if I wanted the usual, even though I'd only been once. I smiled and said yes. It felt nice to be noticed for something as simple as ordering breakfast. While I ate, I pulled out the notepad again and wrote a new line, "No more living invisible." Because that's what I'd been all those years in their house. Invisible, present but not seen, needed but not valued. Now, sitting in that booth with a hot plate of food and a refill of coffee, I felt seen, even if it was just by a waitress who called me Han. When I went back to the motel that evening, I unlocked the door with the brass key and smiled. That little piece of metal felt like the most powerful thing I'd held in years. It wasn't just a motel key. It was proof I could stand on my own 2 feet again. That night, I wrote a short note in my journal. Just one sentence. This is the first day of my life that belongs entirely to me. I slid the notebook into the drawer, turned off the light, and lay down. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Outside, I could hear cars passing now and then, but inside it was quiet, peaceful. And for the first time in a very long time, I fell asleep knowing tomorrow belonged to me. If you know what it's like to finally enjoy something simple like hot coffee without being pulled in every direction, then you know the freedom I felt in that booth. Don't just sit there nodding. Hit that like button and subscribe. The morning after that first good night's sleep at the motel, I woke up with one thought in my head. It was time to cut every string that tied me back to Jeffrey's house. For too long, I had let myself believe helping was harmless. But what I'd really done was hand them control over my life, one small step at a time. I wasn't about to make that mistake again. I started with my accounts. I drove to the credit union where John and I had banked for decades. The same lady who helped us open our first savings account still worked behind the counter. She recognized me right away and asked how I was doing. I smiled politely, but inside I knew why I was there. I asked to update my information. The first thing I did was remove Jeffrey as my emergency contact. Years ago, I had added him when John got sick, thinking it was the sensible thing to do. But after what he'd done, I couldn't leave my future in his hands. I'd like to list my sister Carol instead. I told the clerk. She nodded, typed a few notes, and just like that, the first string was cut. Next, I pulled out a folder I had carried with me since John passed. It held our wills and a few other important papers. I opened mine, and there it was in black and white. Jeffrey listed as the main beneficiary. I stared at that page for a long time. Back when John and I wrote it, it made sense. He was our oldest child, the one we thought could be trusted to handle things responsibly. But the man who demanded my savings for tuition was not the same boy we raised. I folded the papers back into the folder and made an appointment with a lawyer. It was time to rethink everything. After leaving the bank, I sat in my car and did some quick math on a notepad. I added up all the things I had paid for since moving in with Jeffrey and Janice. There was the $20,000 I gave them toward their down payment, so they could close on their house. Jeffrey had called it a short-term loan, but they never mentioned it again. Then there were the smaller amounts that piled up: $3,200 for after-school programs, for $1,500 for car insurance premiums, and who knows how much on groceries, clothes, birthday gifts, and medical copays. The total made my stomach turn. I had poured tens of thousands of dollars into their lives, all without complaint, all out of love. And yet, the one time I said no, they pushed me out like a stranger. That's when I wrote in my journal. I wasn't being selfish. I was finally being careful. Those words steadied me. For years, I thought saying yes proved I was a good mother. Now, I realized that protecting myself didn't make me selfish. It made me wise. That afternoon, I stopped by the church office to pick up a flyer for the widows support group. As I was leaving, I ran into Ruth, an old friend I hadn't seen in months. She hugged me tight and said, "Brenda, where have you been hiding?" We sat on a bench under the oak tree and caught up. I didn't plan on telling her everything, but the words spilled out. I told her about the ultimatum, about the savings, about leaving with nothing but a suitcase. Ruth listened carefully, then shook her head. You know what my mother always said? Money given in guilt is never received with gratitude. Those words hit me right in the chest. She was right. Every time I gave them money, it wasn't really out of joy. It was because I felt cornered, like I had no choice. And instead of being grateful, Jeffrey and Janice grew to expect it. Ruth patted my hand. "You did the right thing walking away. Don't let them pull you back in." That night at the motel, I opened my journal again and wrote her words down, so I wouldn't forget. Money given in guilt is never received with gratitude. I underlined it twice. Over the next few days, I kept moving forward. I updated my passwords, set up new alerts on my accounts, and made sure every bill was in my name only. I called the insurance company and changed my address to the motel for now, so nothing tied back to Jeffrey's house. Each step was like cutting another invisible rope I didn't even know I had tied around me. I also thought about what I wanted my will to say. It didn't sit right anymore that Jeffrey would inherit everything if something happened to me. I decided then and there that my savings should go to people and places that would value it, not treat it like entitlement. maybe a scholarship fund in John's name, maybe part of it to the church, maybe some for the local food pantry. All I knew for certain was that I wasn't leaving it to someone who saw me as a walking wallet. That thought gave me peace I hadn't felt in years. By the end of the week, I could breathe again. I wasn't just surviving at Jeffrey's house, waiting for the next request, or the next bill slipped onto my lap. I was building a life that belonged to me. I closed my journal that night and whispered out loud, "I'm not just cutting ties. I'm finding myself again." And I meant it. The first Sunday after I left Jeffrey's house, I walked into church alone. For years, I'd come in with one of the grandkids holding my hand or tugging at my skirt. I'd settle them in the pew, hand out crayons and a snack pack, and hope they could sit still long enough for the sermon. But this time, it was just me. I carried my Bible, found a seat halfway back, and sat down. It felt strange not to have little voices chattering around me. It felt even stranger to sit there knowing people were noticing. After the service, as we gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and cookies, someone finally asked, "Brenda, where are the children this morning?" I smiled and said, "They're with their parents, where they belong." That was all I said, but it was enough. I could see the look of surprise on their faces. For years, people had grown used to seeing me as the stand-in parent. Now, I was reminding them that I was the grandmother, not the babysitter. Word spread quickly, as it always does in a small town. Some whispered, wondering what had happened. Others just gave me a nod, the kind of nod that said they didn't need details. They understood enough. The truth has a way of leaking out even when you don't broadcast it. Over the next week, I noticed subtle changes. At the grocery store, one of the cashiers leaned over and said, "I heard you've been through a lot, Brenda. Good for you for standing up for yourself." At the library, a friend I hadn't seen in months hugged me and whispered, "It takes courage to walk away." Not everyone said something, but the ones who did gave me strength. Still, I knew the whispers would continue, and I didn't want the story twisted. I didn't want people thinking I left because I didn't care about my grandkids. So one evening at the motel, I logged onto Facebook. I typed out a short message. "Some of you have asked why you haven't seen me with the boys lately." I thought it was time to be honest. I was asked to give up my savings to cover their private school tuition. I chose peace instead. I love my family, but I will not give away the security, John, and I worked for all our lives. Grandparents should be loved, not used. I stared at those words for a long moment before hitting post. At first, nothing happened. Then the comments started rolling in. A woman from church wrote, "Brenda, you're stronger than you know. I went through something similar with my daughter. She expected me to co-sign a loan for a house I couldn't afford. I said no, and she still hasn't forgiven me. Reading this makes me feel less alone." Another woman, one I barely knew, shared, "My son drained my retirement account little by little. I thought I was helping, but when I couldn't give anymore, he stopped calling. Thank you for saying out loud what so many of us are afraid to admit." And the comments kept coming. Some were short. "Good for you. Proud of you. You did the right thing." Others were long, painful stories of mothers and grandmothers who had been pushed past their limits. Reading them, I realized something important. I wasn't the only one carrying this kind of hurt. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of women just like me, women who had given and given until their own lives were chipped away. I scrolled through those comments with tears in my eyes, but not from sadness. It was relief. Relief that I wasn't crazy. Relief that I wasn't cold-hearted. Relief that other people understood exactly why I made the choice I did. The next morning, when I walked back into church, I felt lighter. People still looked, but this time, some of them smiled in quiet support. One woman squeezed my hand and said softly, I saw your post. Thank you for speaking the truth. Even Ruth, my old friend, called me later that week and said, Brenda, you've started something. Don't underestimate how many women needed to read those words. It struck me then how powerful honesty can be. For years, I kept silent because I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want anyone to think badly of Jeffrey or Janice. But silence only protected their behavior. It didn't protect me. Now that the truth was out, I felt like I could breathe again. Of course, I knew Jeffrey and Janice would see it eventually, and I knew they wouldn't be happy. But I wasn't afraid of that anymore. Let them be uncomfortable. I had been uncomfortable for years. One evening, sitting in that motel room with the little lamp casting soft light across the table, I opened my journal and wrote, I am not alone. My story is part of a bigger story, and if speaking it out loud helps someone else, then it was worth every word. That became my new source of strength. The whispers in town didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered were the messages from women across the community and even a few from other states who had seen my post and wanted to share their own truth. Every comment was a reminder. This wasn't just my fight. It was a fight shared by countless women who had been told their value was in what they could give, not who they were. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. When I read those comments, I realized I wasn't alone, and neither are you. If you've ever carried this kind of burden, join me in spreading the truth. Like, share, and subscribe so no woman has to think she's the only one. And if you choose not to, let us know in the comment why you're staying silent. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw their SUV pull into the motel parking lot. The same black SUV I had watched roll into the driveway for years. My stomach tightened, but I stayed seated on the little bench outside my room, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. The doors slammed harder than they needed to. Jeffrey stepped out first, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. Janice followed close behind, sunglasses perched on her head, arms crossed so tight it looked painful. I didn't stand up. I let them come to me. Jeffrey's voice cut the air. So this is where you've been hiding. I set the coffee down on the bench beside me. I wasn't hiding. I was resting. Janice scoffed. Resting? You left us high and dry. Brenda, the boys miss you. We're drowning trying to keep up. I looked at her calmly. They have 2 parents. That's more than most children in this world. They'll be fine. Jeffrey stepped forward, his voice louder now. You're abandoning your family, Mom. You're choosing money over your grandkids. I took a breath before answering. No, Jeffrey, I'm choosing to protect what your father and I built. I already gave you more than you ever acknowledged. Thousands toward your house, years of paying bills, countless hours with your children. And the one time I said no, you treated me like I was disposable. I won't drain the rest of my life away just because you think you're entitled to it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he didn't have a response ready. Janice jumped in, her tone sharp. You've been telling everyone our business. Do you realize how humiliating it is? You're airing dirty laundry online, like some bitter old woman. I met her glare without flinching. I didn't mention your names. I didn't accuse. I told the truth. And the truth is simple. I was asked to give up my savings for tuition, and I chose peace instead. If that feels humiliating, maybe it's because deep down you know it's wrong. For the first time, Jeffrey looked uneasy. His eyes darted away from mine, and his voice lost some of its fire. You didn't have to go to strangers, Mom. You could have kept it in the family. I shook my head. I kept it in the family for 3 years. All it did was eat me alive. Speaking out is what saved me. The silence stretched between us until Janice broke it. You think you're strong now, but what about later? What happens when you need help? What happens when your health fails and you don't have anyone to care for you? Her words were meant to scare me, but instead they gave me clarity. "I'll plan for that myself," I said firmly. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. I've updated my will. I've taken steps so that I can age with dignity without depending on people who see me as a bank account." That got their attention. Jeffrey blinked hard, his mouth hanging open. "Wait, you changed your will?" "Yes," I answered plainly. "I updated everything. My estate won't be going to you, Jeffrey. Not after this. I'd rather see it help people who actually appreciate it. Scholarships, church funds, maybe even a shelter. But it won't be handed to someone who thought they could bully me into giving it away while I'm still alive." Janice gasped, shaking her head. "You can't be serious. After everything we've done for you." I cut her off with a steady voice. "Everything you've done for me? You gave me a guest room." "Yes. And in return, I gave you financial support you never once thanked me for. I babysat, I cooked, I paid bills. That wasn't charity from you. That was me holding your family together while you both ignored what it cost me." Jeffrey finally spoke again, his voice softer now. "I didn't realize how much you were keeping track." I looked straight at him. "It's not about keeping score, son. It's about respect. I never threw it in your face before, but when you demanded more, when you demanded everything, I had no choice but to remind myself of what I had already given. And the truth is, it was far more than you ever had the right to expect." He rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the gravel. For the first time, I saw the boy I raised flicker behind a man standing there. But it was too late for sympathy. Janice wasn't backing down. She pointed at me, her voice high and trembling. "You're tearing this family apart, Brenda. People are talking about us at church, at school, everywhere. Do you know how hard it is to show my face?" I leaned forward on the bench, my voice calm but sharp. "I didn't tear this family apart, Janice. Greed did. Ultimatums did. You both made a choice, and now you don't like how it looks in the light of day. That's not my fault." She looked like she wanted to argue more, but Jeffrey touched her arm. He finally looked me in the eye and asked, "So what now, Mom? Is this it? You're just done with us?" I stood up, picking up my coffee cup, and faced them squarely. "No, Jeffrey. I'm done being used. I'm done being guilt. I'll always love you. I'll always love the boys. But I won't be your safety net anymore. No more financial access. No more ultimatums. No more guilt trips." For a moment, all three of us stood there in the quiet motel lot. Cars passed on the highway. Birds chirped from the wires overhead, but none of us moved. Finally, Jeffrey nodded slightly, like the weight of what I said had landed. Janice muttered under her breath, but I didn't bother asking what she said. It didn't matter. They turned and walked back to the SUV. The door slammed again, and the engine roared to life. They pulled out of the lot without looking back. I stood there, coffee in hand, watching the dust settle where their tires had been. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Instead, I felt steady, clear, free, and I wanted them to understand that my decision wasn't just words. 2 days later, Jeffrey got a letter in the mail. A crisp envelope stamped with my lawyer's name on the corner. Inside was a simple 2-page document. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was business. The letter stated plainly that the $20,000 I had given them for their down payment years ago was never recorded as a gift. It had been called a short-term loan. My lawyer requested full repayment within 90 days or legal action could follow. It was all written in black and white, signed, and official. No more debates. No more guilt trips. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to argue. The law would do the talking for me. Later, I heard through a friend that Jeffrey looked pale when he opened that letter. Janice, apparently, was furious, but they couldn't dismiss it as gossip or exaggeration. This wasn't a Facebook post or a whispered story. This was legal. That night, I sat at the motel desk and opened my journal. I wrote one line: "Peace doesn't come when people stop making demands. Peace comes when you stop saying yes." After the meeting in the parking lot, I knew I couldn't keep living out of a motel. It had served its purpose, giving me a place to breathe and think, but I wanted something more permanent, something that was mine. I started asking around and checking the listings in the local paper. After a week, I found a small cottage for rent just outside of Franklin, near the river. It wasn't much, one bedroom, a little porch, and a tiny patch of yard, but when I walked through the front door and smelled the faint scent of pine wood, I knew it was right. I signed the lease that same day. Moving in was simple. I didn't have much besides my suitcase, a few keepsakes, and some clothes. I stopped by a thrift store in town and bought a second-hand couch, a small dining table, and a set of mismatched dishes. I picked up curtains on clearance and hung them myself. The place didn't look fancy, but every piece was chosen by me. For me, the kitchen became my favorite spot. It had just enough counter space for a coffee maker, a toaster, and a little radio I bought at a yard sale. The first time I brewed coffee there, I leaned against the counter, sipping from my favorite mug, and thought, this is home. This is mine. Still, something felt missing. The cottage was quiet, too quiet. I'd grown used to noise, even if it came from ungrateful mouths. That's when I decided to visit the animal shelter. Rows of barking dogs greeted me, but in the last room sat a gray and white cat with soft green eyes. She wasn't meowing like the others. She just sat calmly, watching me. Her tag read, Daisy. I asked to hold her, and the moment they placed her in my lap, she curled up and purred like she'd known me forever. That was it. I signed the papers and brought her home. Daisy became my companion. She followed me from room to room, slept at the foot of my bed, and greeted me at the door when I came back from errands. She didn't ask for money, time, or sacrifice. She just wanted food, a warm spot to nap, and a little affection. Having her there reminded me that love doesn't have to come with strings. With the cottage set up and Daisy keeping me company, I began to think about what to do with my days. I wasn't ready to sit idle. I had too much to say, too much to share. That's when the idea of starting a blog came to me. My granddaughter had shown me years ago how to use a computer, and I still had my laptop. One evening, I sat at the little kitchen table and opened a blank page. At the top, I typed, "Life after ultimatums." It felt fitting. That was what I was living now. Life after being told I had to give everything or leave. Life after realizing I deserved more than to be treated like a bank account. My first post was short, but honest. Savings are not for guilt. They're for survival. For years, I thought saying yes made me a good mother. I thought giving until it hurt meant I was doing my part. But I see now that draining my future wouldn't have helped anyone. I'm here to remind women like me, your security matters. Don't let guilt take it away. I hesitated before hitting publish, but once I did, the words were out there. At first, I thought maybe a handful of people would read it. But within a day, the comments started rolling in. One woman wrote, "Brenda, this hit me hard. My daughter asked me to co-sign her second mortgage, and I felt guilty saying no. Thank you for reminding me I don't owe her my retirement." Another shared, "I've been raising my grandkids for years, paying out of pocket. I thought I was the only one who felt invisible." Reading this gave me strength. Dozens of messages appeared, all from women who had been pushed beyond their limits. Some thanked me for giving words to what they couldn't say out loud. Others said they were going to start setting boundaries in their own lives. I sat at the table that night, reading each one with Daisy curled in my lap, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about all of us, women who had given everything, often silently, and finally needed permission to put themselves first. Over the next few weeks, I kept writing. Sometimes I shared memories of John and how careful we'd been with money. Other times I wrote about little victories, like buying groceries just for myself or planting flowers by the porch without anyone telling me it was a waste of time. The blog grew faster than I expected. More and more women left comments, some even sharing their own ultimatums. It felt like a quiet revolution, ordinary grandmothers deciding enough was enough. One evening, I logged in and saw that my first post had been shared hundreds of times. I leaned back in my chair, hands over my mouth, and whispered, "Well, John, looks like we're helping more people than we ever thought possible." That night, I closed my journal with a new entry. I'm not just surviving. I'm teaching. And maybe, just maybe, I'm helping someone else walk away from their ultimatum, too. The cottage wasn't big. My furniture wasn't new. My savings wasn't overflowing. But what I had was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt steady in my own skin. And with Daisy curled up beside me and strangers across the country reading my words, I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. I was building a life that finally reflected who I was, a woman who chose peace over guilt. That post went farther than I ever dreamed, because women everywhere knew exactly what I meant. If those words stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it, and subscribe so the message reaches the women who need it most. It was nearly 3 months before I heard Jeffrey's voice again. The phone rang one quiet Saturday morning as Daisy dozed in the sun on the porch. When I picked it up, his tone was different, calmer, almost careful. "Mom," he said, "could we meet for coffee? Just the two of us." For a moment, I didn't answer. My first thought was that Janice had sent him, maybe hoping I'd bend if she wasn't there. But something in his voice told me this wasn't her idea. "All right," I said, "the diner on Main Street. Tomorrow at 10. And Jeffrey, just you." "I understand," he said softly. The next morning, I got to the diner early. I chose a booth near the back, the one with the chipped salt shaker and a view of the parking lot. I ordered a coffee and wrapped my hands around the warm mug, steadying myself. Jeffrey walked in right on time. He looked tired. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. He slid into the booth across from me and set his phone face down on the table, a small gesture, but one that told me he was there to talk, not to hide. Neither of us rushed to speak. Finally, he sighed. "Mom, I owe you an apology. We were wrong. I was wrong." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. He rubbed his forehead. "We got caught up in things that don't really matter. Janice wanted the boys in private school because everyone else in her circle was doing it. I didn't push back. I thought if I went along, life would be easier. But it just made us desperate. And instead of figuring it out ourselves, I turned to you. I shouldn't have." Hearing those words was something I never thought I'd get. But I didn't rush to comfort him. I'd learned too much to slip back into old habits. "Jeffrey," I said, "I spent decades building that savings with your father. It wasn't for status or appearances. It was for survival. When you told me to give it up, it felt like you were erasing everything we stood for." He lowered his head. "I see that now. I didn't back you up when Janice pushed, and I regret it every day." The waitress came by with a pot of coffee, and we paused while she filled our cups. When she left, I leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye. "I forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean I go back to funding your life. Those days are over." He nodded slowly. "I know. I'm not here to ask for money. I just, I don't want things to end the way they were left. The boys miss you. I miss you. For the first time in a long while, I saw honesty in his eyes. Not entitlement, not excuses, just honesty. I sipped my coffee and thought about what John would say if he were sitting next to me. He'd tell me to be firm but fair. Jeffrey, I said, if I spend my savings, it'll be on my dignity, not your tuition bills. Do you understand? His shoulders dropped, and for a moment I thought he might cry. He nodded again. I understand. We sat in silence for a while, just sipping coffee. Outside, I saw a man walking his dog, and a couple laughing as they crossed the street. Life moving forward, as it always does. Finally, Jeffrey spoke again. I don't know how to fix all this, Mom, but I want to try. I softened, but I didn't let my guard down completely. Then start by showing up for your kids without expecting me to carry the load. Start by showing them gratitude, so they don't grow up thinking love and money are the same thing. He nodded once more. I can do that. The check came, and for the first time in years, Jeffrey reached for it without hesitation. He paid, and we walked out together. In the parking lot, we hugged. It wasn't long, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Then he drove off, and I went back to my cottage. That night, I opened my blog and wrote a new post. I titled it, One Honest Cup of Coffee. I wrote, sometimes the people who hurt us come back with words we never thought we'd hear. Forgiveness is possible, but forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean stepping back into old patterns. Forgiveness means you can let go of bitterness while still protecting your peace. When love turns into obligation, walking away isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes, if you hold firm long enough, the people who took you for granted might finally learn what respect looks like. When I hit publish, comments started appearing within minutes. Women wrote that they wished they had drawn lines sooner. Others said they felt stronger just knowing it was possible to forgive without giving everything away again. As I read through them, Daisy curled up beside me. I felt a calm sense of closure. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My savings was safe, my peace was intact, and my voice was reaching people who needed to hear it. And I knew one thing for sure. I had no regrets about picking up that suitcase and walking out. Now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you give up your savings for tuition, or would you protect your peace? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched you in any way, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be told, and your support makes sure they reach the women who need them most.